Daily Words of God. God created man, and since then has ever guided the life of mankind. Whether in bestowing upon mankind blessings, creating laws and commandments for men, or stipulating the various rules for life. Do you know what God's intended aim is in doing these things? Firstly, can you say with certainty that all that God does is for the good of mankind? These may seem to you like grand, hollow words, but upon examining the details within, is not everything that God does intended to lead and guide man toward living a normal life? Whether it be causing man to abide by his rules or to keep his laws, God's aim is for man not to fall into worshiping Satan and not to be harmed by Satan. This is most fundamental. And this is what was done in the very beginning. At the very beginning, when man did not understand God's will, God made some simple laws and rules, and made regulations that covered every conceivable matter. These regulations are simple, yet within them they contain God's will. God treasures, cherishes, and dearly loves mankind. So can we say that His heart is holy? Can we say His heart is clean?
Yes.
Does God have any additional motives?
No.
So is this aim of His right and positive? In the course of God's work, all of the regulations He has made have a positive effect on man, leading the way for man. So are there any self-serving thoughts in God's mind? Does God have any additional aims where man is concerned? Does God want to make use of man in some way? Not in the slightest. God does as He says, and His words and actions are matched by His thoughts in His heart. There is no tainted purpose, no self-serving thoughts. Nothing He does is for Himself. All that He does for man, without any private objectives. Although He has plans and intentions, which He places upon man, none of it is for Himself. Everything He does is done purely for mankind, to protect mankind, to keep mankind from being led astray. So is this heart of His not precious? Can you see even the tiniest sign of such a precious heart in Satan? You cannot see the slightest hint of this in Satan. You cannot see it at all. Everything God does is revealed naturally. Now, let us look at the way God works. How does He do His work? Does God take these laws and His words and bind them tightly around the head of every person? Like the band-tightening spell, imposing them on each and every human being? Does He work in this way?
No.
So, in what way does God do His work? Does He threaten? Does He beat about the bush when He speaks to you?
No.
When you do not understand the truth, how does God guide you? He shines a light on you, telling you clearly that doing this is not in keeping with the truth. And then He tells you what you should do. From these ways in which God works, what kind of relationship do you feel you have with God? Do you feel that God is beyond reach?
No.
So how do you feel when you see these ways in which God works? God's words are especially real, and His relationship with man especially normal. God is exceptionally close to you. There is no distance between you and God. When God guides you, when He provides for you, helps you and supports you, you feel how amiable God is, the reverence He inspires. You feel how lovely He is. You feel His warmth. But when God reproaches you with corruption, or when He judges and disciplines you for rebelling against Him, what method does He use? Does He reproach you with words? Does He discipline you through your environment and through people, affairs, and things?
Yes.
To what extent does God discipline you? Does God discipline man to the same degree that Satan harms man?
No, God disciplines man only to the extent that man can endure.
God works in a gentle, delicate, loving, and caring way, a way that is extraordinarily measured and proper. His way does not provoke in you intense emotional reactions such as, "God must let me do this," or "God must let me do that." God never gives you that kind of mental or emotional intensity that makes things unbearable. Is that not so? Even when you accept God's words of judgment and chastisement, how do you feel then? When you sense the authority and power of God, how do you feel then? Do you feel that God is divine and inviolable? Do you feel distance between yourself and God at these times? Do you feel the fear of God? No. Rather, you feel fearful reverence toward God. Is it not because of God's work that people feel all of these things? Would they have these feelings if it were Satan who was at work? Absolutely not. God uses His words, His truth, and His life to continuously provide for man, to support man. When man is weak, when man is feeling dispirited, God certainly does not speak harshly, saying, "Do not feel dispirited." What is there to be dispirited about? Why are you weak? What reason is there to be weak? You are always so weak, and you are always so negative. What is the use of you being alive? Just die and have done with it. Does God work in this way?
No.
Does God have the authority to act in this way? Yes, He does. Yet God does not act in this way. The reason why God does not act in this way is because of His essence, the essence of the holiness of God. His love for man, His treasuring and cherishing of man, cannot be expressed clearly in just one or two sentences. It is not something that is brought about by man's boasting, but is something that God brings forth in actual practice. It is the revelation of God's essence. Can all these ways in which God works cause man to see the holiness of God? In all of these ways in which God works, including God's good intentions, including the effects God wishes to work on man, including the different ways God adopts to work on man, the kind of work He does, what He wants man to understand. Have you seen any evil or deceitfulness in God's good intentions?
No.
So in everything God does, everything God says, everything He thinks in His heart, as well as all the essence of God that He reveals, can we call God holy?
Yes.
Has any man ever seen this holiness in the world or within himself? Apart from God, have you ever seen it in any human being or in Satan?
No.
Based on our discussion thus far, can we call God the unique, the holy God himself?
Yes.
All that God gives to man, including the words of God, the different ways in which God works on man, what God tells man, what God reminds man of, what he advises and encourages. It all originates from one essence, the holiness of God. If there were no such holy God, no man could take his place to do the work he does. If God had handed these men entirely over to Satan, have you ever considered what kind of condition all of you would be in today? Would you all be sitting here, whole and inviolate? Would you also say, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it? Would you be so brazen, so cocksure and full of swagger, as to speak such words and boast without shame before God? You absolutely would, without a shadow of a doubt. Satan's attitude toward man allows man to see that Satan's nature and essence are utterly different from God's. What is it about the essence of Satan that is the opposite of the holiness of God?
Satan's evil.
Satan's evil nature is the opposite of the holiness of God. The reason why the majority of people do not recognize this revelation of God's and this essence of God's holiness is because they live under the domain of Satan, within the corruption of Satan, and within Satan's living enclosure. They do not know what holiness is, or how to define holiness. Even when you perceive the holiness of God, you still cannot define it as being the holiness of God with any certainty. This is a disparity within man's knowledge of the holiness of God.